The emergency klaxon pierced through the quiet hum of the research vessel Terra Nova as Commander Sarah Chen stared at the data scrolling across her screens. 50 years. The number blinked red on her display like a wound that refused to heal. 50 years of continuous warfare between two civilizations she had never even heard of until this moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Commander, called out Dr. Marcus Webb from the communications array, his voice tight with disbelief. You need to hear this transmission. It's unlike anything we've ever encountered. Chen moved swiftly across the bridge, her boots clicking against the metal floor. The Terra Nova had been conducting routine surveys of the Outer Rim territories, mapping new star systems, and cataloging potential resources for the Earth Colonial Administration. They were supposed to be alone out here, thousands of light-years from any known civilization. Yet now her screens showed something that defied everything they thought they knew about this region of space. The translated voice that emerged from the speakers carried a weight of exhaustion that transcended species. This is High Marshal Korven of the Threnodi Republic. Our forces are trapped on the mineral world of Xerion Prime. We have been under siege for 7 months. Our children starve while we fight for scraps of territory we can no longer remember why we wanted. If there are any neutral vessels receiving this transmission, know that the Valdris Confederacy will show you no mercy. They have made this sector a graveyard of worlds. Before Chen could process the full implications, another voice cut through the static. This one carried a different quality of desperation, tinged with what sounded like barely controlled rage. Attention to any ships in the Xerion sector. This is War Leader Thane of the Valdris 4th Fleet. The Threnodi criminals have poisoned 3 of our agricultural worlds with biological weapons. They speak of mercy while they murder our offspring before they can even crawl. Any vessel that aids these monsters will be considered an enemy of the Valdris people and destroyed without warning. Chen felt her stomach drop. 2 civilizations, both claiming the other was responsible for atrocities, both sounding like they were fighting for their very survival. She turned to her crew, seeing her own shock reflected in their faces. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist, was already pulling up star charts on her workstation. Commander, according to our long-range sensors, there are active battle zones across at least 40 different star systems. The energy signatures suggest massive fleets engaged in continuous combat. How is that possible? Chen asked, though she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. Our surveys showed this entire region was uninhabited. Lieutenant James Park, their youngest officer, looked up from his tactical station with wide eyes. Ma'am, I think they've been fighting so long that they've driven all other life out of the region. I'm reading the remains of what used to be thriving ecosystems on dozens of worlds. Most of them are just dead now. Chen moved to the central holographic display and activated the long-range scanner array. What she saw made her blood run cold. The 3-dimensional map showed a vast sphere of space, roughly 50 light-years in diameter, dotted with the debris fields of destroyed ships and the gutted husks of once habitable planets. Energy readings indicated ongoing battles in multiple systems simultaneously, with fleet movements suggesting a scale of warfare that dwarfed anything in human history. My God, whispered Dr. Webb. How many ships are we looking at? Dr. Vasquez ran the calculations, her fingers flying over her console. Conservative estimate? Each side has deployed at least 10,000 vessels. That's just what we can detect from this range. The actual numbers could be much higher. And they've been doing this for 50 years? Chen asked, though the evidence was right in front of her. According to the communication logs I'm intercepting, yes, Dr. Webb confirmed. The computer is translating fragments from both sides. They reference battles that happened decades ago as if they were yesterday. Places that were destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. Entire generations that have known nothing but war. Chen had served in the Earth Defense Force for 15 years before taking command of the Terra Nova. She had seen conflict, had commanded ships in the border skirmishes with the Centauri pirates. But this was something beyond her experience. This was industrial-scale destruction stretched across half a century. "What started it?" she asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Vasquez had been monitoring the historical references in the transmissions. She looked up with an expression of disbelief. "Near as I can tell, it began with a trade dispute. The Threnodi Republic and the Valdris Confederacy both claimed mining rights to a binary star system rich in quantum crystals. The initial conflict lasted maybe 6 months. But then what? Then it just escalated. Each side suffered losses and demanded retribution. Every act of revenge triggered a counter-revenge. After the first few years, the original dispute became irrelevant. They're fighting now because they've been fighting for so long that neither side remembers how to stop." The bridge fell silent except for the constant stream of distress calls and battle reports flowing through their communications array. Chen watched the tactical display, seeing the slow dance of massive fleets maneuvering around dead worlds like scavengers fighting over bones. Lieutenant Park broke the silence. "Commander, I'm receiving a direct transmission. It's addressed to any unknown vessels in the region. Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, showing a face that was unmistakably alien yet somehow familiar. The being had pale blue skin, large dark eyes that seemed ancient with weariness, and what appeared to be natural armor plating along its skull. When it spoke, the universal translator rendered its words with careful precision. "Unknown vessel, I am Admiral Kess of the Threnodi Deep Space Command. Your ship configuration is unfamiliar to us. If you represent a new species, be warned that this region of space has become a zone of total warfare. The Valdris Confederacy shows no distinction between military and civilian targets. We advise you to retreat to safe distance and await the conclusion of hostilities." Chen looked at her crew. Dr. Vasquez was studying the aliens' features with professional interest. Dr. Webb was analyzing the linguistic patterns in the transmission. Lieutenant Park was monitoring for any sign of weapons lock from surrounding fleets. "What conclusion?" Chen found herself saying aloud. "After 50 years, what makes them think there will ever be a conclusion?" As if the universe had heard her question, another transmission cut through the first. This being looked entirely different, with darker skin that seemed to shimmer with an oily iridescence, multiple eyes arranged in a complex pattern, and what appeared to be breathing apparatus integrated into its neck. "Stranger ship, this is Fleet Commander Zara of the Valdris War Council. You broadcast on frequencies we do not recognize. If you are new to this region, understand that the Threnodi terrorists have turned this sector into a killing ground. They use civilian settlements as shields for their military operations. Any ship that approaches their positions will be assumed to be carrying supplies for their war machine and will be destroyed accordingly." The transmission ended, leaving Chen staring at a blank screen. Two different species, both claiming the other was responsible for turning space into a battlefield. Both warning her away from their enemies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Both sounding like they were fighting a defensive war against an implacable foe. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said slowly, "in your professional opinion, what do you make of these two species?" The xenobiologist had been taking detailed notes during both transmissions. "Commander, both appear to be highly intelligent, technologically advanced civilizations. The Threnodi seem to be naturally cautious, methodical. Notice how their admiral provided specific warnings and advised retreat. The Valdris appear more aggressive, more direct in their communication style. But neither of them struck me as inherently evil or warlike. Then how did this happen?" Dr. Webb looked up from his analysis. "I've been studying the historical communications we've intercepted. In the early years of the conflict, both sides regularly attempted ceasefires and peace negotiations. There are records of at least 37 separate attempts to end the war through diplomacy. What happened to those attempts? They failed because both sides had fundamentally different ideas about what peace should look like. The Threnodi wanted established borders and non-aggression pacts. The Valdris wanted open expansion rights and resource-sharing agreements. Every compromise satisfied one side while making the other feel cheated. Chen began to pace the bridge, her mind working through the implications. So they kept fighting because they couldn't agree on how to stop fighting. More than that, Dr. Vasquez added. After decades of warfare, both civilizations have evolved into military societies. Their entire economies are built around supporting their war fleets. Their political systems are organized around military command structures. Their cultures celebrate warriors and battle victories. Even if they wanted to make peace tomorrow, neither side would know how to function without war. The communications array chimed with another incoming transmission. This time it wasn't directed at them specifically, but was a broad broadcast on all frequencies. The face that appeared belonged to a Threnodi officer, but this one looked younger than the admiral, with armor that was scratched and battle-worn. This is Colonel Vex of the Threnodi 7th Defense Battalion. We are requesting immediate evacuation support for the civilian population of Kepler Station. The Valdris have deployed planet-killer weapons against the installation. We have approximately 4 hours before the station's shields fail completely. Any ships capable of carrying refugees, please respond. We will provide safe passage coordinates. Before the message finished, it was interrupted by a Valdris transmission. This being appeared to be speaking from a combat bridge, with explosions visible in the background, and the sound of alarms bleeding through the audio. Valdris Strike Force Alpha to all operational units. The Threnodi have triggered the orbital mines around Kepler Station. They're using their own civilians as bait to draw our ships into the kill zone. Do not approach the station. Repeat. The entire area is booby-trapped by Threnodi terrorists. Chen felt sick. They're both trying to save civilians, but each side thinks the other is using those same civilians as weapons. Lieutenant Park was monitoring the tactical situation around Kepler Station. Commander, I'm reading multiple fleets converging on that location. If they engage each other with civilians trapped in the middle, how many people are we talking about? Dr. Webb was translating the technical details from both transmissions. Kepler Station shows a population of approximately 2 million beings, mixed Threnodi and Valdris civilians who were trapped there when the latest offensive began. 2 million people about to become casualties in a war that had already killed billions. Chen made a decision that would change everything. Lieutenant Park, set course for Kepler Station. Maximum speed. Commander? Park looked confused. Our orders are to observe and report back to Earth Command. We're not supposed to get involved in alien conflicts. Our orders, Chen said firmly, are to protect human interests and gather intelligence about potential threats to Earth. A 50-year war that's turned an entire sector into a graveyard definitely qualifies as a threat. If we can learn something about how this conflict operates, it might help us prevent something similar from happening to us. Dr. Vasquez looked worried. Sarah, we're one ship against fleets that number in the thousands. If we get caught between them, we're not going there to fight, we're going there to observe. And maybe, if we're very lucky, to learn something that could help end this madness. The Terra Nova changed course, heading toward the center of a battle zone where 2 civilizations had been destroying each other for longer than most humans had been alive. As they traveled, more transmissions flooded their communication systems, painting a picture of devastation that defied comprehension. Reports of entire star systems rendered uninhabitable by exotic weapons. Stories of battle fleets so massive they could be seen with the naked eye from planetary surfaces. Accounts of technological innovations developed solely to inflict greater casualties on the enemy. Both sides had become so focused on fighting that they had forgotten what they were originally fighting for. Dr. Webb had been analyzing the linguistic evolution in the transmissions spanning 5 decades. Commander, this is fascinating from an anthropological perspective. In the early war communications, both sides used formal diplomatic language, even when declaring hostilities. They followed established protocols for warfare, protected non-combatants, respected territorial boundaries. And now? Now their languages have evolved new words, specifically for describing types of destruction that didn't exist 50 years ago. They've developed entirely new grammatical structures around concepts of total warfare. Their cultures have literally reshaped themselves around the idea that the other side must be completely eliminated. Chen studied the tactical display showing their approach to Kepler Station. The space around the installation was filled with debris from previous battles, creating a maze of twisted metal and frozen atmosphere that had once been ships and space habitats. In the distance, she could see the energy signatures of multiple fleets maneuvering for position. Dr. Vasquez, based on your analysis of both species, do you think they're capable of coexistence? The xenobiologist considered the question carefully. Under normal circumstances, absolutely. The Threnodi appear to be naturally cooperative, focused on building stable communities. The Valdris seem to be explorers and innovators, always pushing boundaries. In a peaceful galaxy, they would probably be natural allies. Their strengths complement each other perfectly. But after 50 years of war? After 50 years, both sides have spent multiple generations teaching their children that the other species is inherently evil and must be destroyed. They've created mythologies around their conflict, turned it into a religious crusade. Breaking that kind of psychological conditioning would be challenging. Lieutenant Park called out from his station. Commander, we're approaching the edge of the battle zone. I'm detecting at least 6 different fleets in the area, with more ships jumping in every few minutes. Any sign they've noticed us? Not yet. Our ship design is completely unknown to them, and we're small enough that we might be mistaken for debris or a supply ship. Chen moved to the forward viewing port and looked out at the scene unfolding before them. Kepler's station hung in space like a wounded giant, its massive hull scarred by decades of attacks and repairs. Its shields flickered with an unhealthy purple glow that suggested they were operating well beyond safe parameters. Around it, the vacuum was filled with the traces of ongoing battle, energy discharges, missile trails, and the brief flares of ships being destroyed. The scale was overwhelming. Chen had thought she understood space warfare from her military service, but this was like comparing a street fight to a global war. Individual battles involved hundreds of ships on each side. The weapons being deployed could crack planets. The tactical maneuvers required coordination across multiple star systems simultaneously. Dr. Webb, are you getting any communication from the station itself? Fragments. The civilian government is trying to coordinate evacuation efforts, but they're getting contradictory orders from both military forces. The Threnodi fleet is telling them to shelter in place because the Valdris will attack any evacuation ships. The Valdris fleet is telling them to abandon the station immediately because the Threnodi have booby-trapped it. So the civilians don't know who to trust. Worse than that, they don't trust anyone. According to these transmissions, civilian populations throughout the war zone have learned that both military forces will sacrifice them if it provides a tactical advantage. They've developed their own independent survival strategies that often conflict with official orders from either side. Chen watched as a group of small civilian ships launched from Kepler Station, trying to reach the edge of the battle zone before the military forces noticed them. Almost immediately, both fleets began moving to intercept the refugees. She realized with horror that both sides genuinely believed they were protecting the civilians from the other side's treachery. "This is insane," she whispered. "They're both trying to help, but they're so convinced the other side is evil that they can't coordinate their efforts." Dr. Vasquez had been monitoring the biological signatures from both fleets. "Commander, I'm detecting stress markers in the communications from both sides that suggest their crews are operating under extreme psychological pressure. These aren't soldiers who enjoy war. They're people who believe they're fighting for the survival of their species. Are they wrong? That's the tragedy. At this point, they might be right. Both civilizations have invested so much in this war that losing might actually mean extinction. Their entire societies are organized around the conflict. If one side achieved total victory tomorrow, they probably wouldn't know how to function in peacetime." The tactical display showed the civilian evacuation ships being herded in different directions by the competing fleets. The Threnodi forces were trying to guide them toward their own territory, while the Valdris were attempting to escort them to safety in a different system. Neither group was willing to trust the other with civilian lives, so they were essentially fighting over who got to rescue the refugees. Lieutenant Park looked up from his console with a grim expression. "Commander, at the rate this is escalating, those civilian ships are going to get caught in the crossfire within the next hour." Chen made another decision that went far beyond her original mission parameters. "Open a channel to all ships in the area, all frequencies, maximum broadcast power." "Ma'am, that will definitely get their attention." "Good. That's the point." The communications system activated, sending her voice across the entire battle zone. She knew that within minutes, every ship in the area would be analyzing her transmission, trying to determine what this unknown vessel represented and whether it was a threat. This is Commander Chen of the Earth vessel Terra Nova. We are representatives of humanity, a species that is new to this region of space. We have been monitoring your conflict and wish to offer assistance to the civilian populations caught in this battle zone. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Her communications board lit up with dozens of incoming transmissions from both fleets, warning messages, demands for identification, threats of destruction if she interfered with military operations, and desperate pleas for help all flooded through her speakers simultaneously. Dr. Webb was trying to sort through the chaos of responses. Commander, both sides are demanding to know who we represent and what our intentions are. Some of them are threatening us, but others are asking if we have the capacity to evacuate civilians. What's our actual capacity? Lieutenant Park ran the calculations. The Terra Nova can carry maybe 300 people in emergency conditions. There are 2 million civilians on that station. Chen felt the weight of impossible mathematics. Her ship could save a tiny fraction of the people who needed help, but even that small action might make a difference. More importantly, it might demonstrate to both sides that there were alternatives to endless warfare. Dr. Vasquez, if we rescued civilians from both species, took them to neutral territory outside the war zone, would that prove we're not aligned with either side? It might. But it could also make both sides consider us a threat. If we can operate freely in their battle zone, they might assume we're working for their enemies. Chen studied the tactical display, watching the dance of massive fleets around a single space station. 50 years of war had created a situation where every action was interpreted through the lens of conflict. Every gesture of peace was assumed to be a trick. Every offer of help was suspected of being a trap. But someone had to break the cycle. Someone had to prove that there were alternatives to endless destruction, even if that someone was just a single exploration ship from a species that nobody had ever heard of. Lieutenant Park, take us closer to Kepler Station. Dr. Webb, prepare a general broadcast explaining who we are and what we're offering. Dr. Vasquez, start analyzing both fleets for psychological pressure points. If we're going to help these people, we need to understand how 50 years of war has changed the way they think. As the Terra Nova moved deeper into the battle zone, Chen realized they were about to attempt something that neither of the advanced civilizations had managed in half a century: find a way to save lives without taking sides in a conflict where both sides believed they were fighting for survival itself. The civilian ships from Kepler Station were still trying to reach safety, herded by competing fleets that refused to trust each other with refugee protection. Energy weapons were charging. Battle formations were taking shape. In less than an hour, the rescue attempt would turn into another battle in a war that had already consumed countless billions of lives. Chen looked at her crew, seeing determination mixed with fear in their faces. They were about to insert themselves into the most dangerous military situation in known galactic history, armed with nothing but good intentions, and the desperate hope that sometimes an outside perspective could see solutions that the participants could not. "All right, people," she said quietly. "Let's see if humanity can do something that 2 advanced civilizations couldn't manage in 50 years. Let's try to save some lives without starting another war." The Terra Nova continued its approach toward Kepler Station, carrying 4 humans into the heart of a conflict that had defined the fate of an entire sector for longer than most species had been spacefaring. Behind them, Earth seemed impossibly far away. Ahead of them, 2 massive fleets prepared for another battle in their endless war. And somewhere between those opposing forces, 2 million civilians waited to discover whether they would be saved or become casualties in a conflict that had long since forgotten what it was originally about. Dr. Elena Vasquez finished her analysis of the psychological profiles from both alien fleets just as the Terra Nova reached optimal position between the warring forces. Her findings painted a picture that was both heartbreaking and illuminating. After decades of continuous warfare, both the Threnodi and Valdris military personnel exhibited classic symptoms of collective trauma response. They had become so conditioned to expect betrayal and violence that they literally could not process the concept of genuine neutrality. Commander Chen studied the data on her personal tablet while watching the tactical situation develop around Kepler Station. The civilian evacuation ships were now caught in a 3-way standoff, With Threnodi forces blocking Valdris rescue attempts and Valdris forces preventing Threnodi evacuation efforts, both sides were operating under the absolute conviction that allowing the enemy to control civilian populations would lead to mass executions. "Dr. Webb," Chen said quietly, "I need you to prepare 3 separate communication protocols. We're going to do something that hasn't been attempted in this sector for 50 years. "What's that, Commander?" "We're going to force both sides to work together whether they want to or not." Lieutenant Park looked up from his tactical display with concern. "Ma'am, both fleets have weapons that could vaporize us before we could even send a distress call. How do we force cooperation from opponents who have been trying to kill each other for half a century?" Chen had been thinking about this problem since they first encountered the conflict. The answer lay not in military superiority, which they completely lacked, but in human psychology and the unique perspective of an outside observer who had no stake in the ancient grudges that drove this war. "We're going to use their greatest weakness against them," she explained. "Both sides are so focused on preventing the other from gaining any advantage that they've forgotten how to pursue their own objectives independently. We're going to exploit that tunnel vision." Dr. Vasquez activated her workstation and began implementing the first phase of Chen's plan. Using the biological data she had gathered from monitoring both fleets, she crafted a series of subliminal audio frequencies that would trigger stress responses in both species. Not enough to cause harm, but sufficient to heighten their already elevated anxiety levels and make them more likely to react emotionally rather than strategically. The frequencies were embedded in what appeared to be routine navigation broadcasts, the kind of technical chatter that filled space around any major installation. Both alien fleets would receive the transmissions as background noise, while their attention remained focused on each other and the trapped civilians. Meanwhile, Dr. Webb was preparing the second component of their intervention. He had spent hours analyzing the command structures of both military forces, identifying key decision-makers and studying their individual communication patterns. What he discovered was that after 50 years of war, both sides had developed remarkably similar tactical doctrines despite their biological differences. "Commander," Webb reported, "I've found something interesting. Both fleets are using almost identical protocols for civilian evacuation procedures. They've been fighting each other so long that they've actually learned from each other's techniques. The problem is that neither side recognizes this similarity because they're too focused on perceived differences." This gave Chen the opening she needed for the most audacious part of her plan. If both sides were using similar procedures but refusing to coordinate because they didn't trust each other, then perhaps they could be tricked into coordination without realizing it was happening. "Lieutenant Park, I need you to prepare our communications array for a very specific type of signal manipulation. We're going to become a relay station without either side knowing it." Park's fingers flew over his console as he configured the Terra Nova systems according to Chen's specifications. The modifications would allow their ship to intercept communications from both fleets, process them through the universal translator, and retransmit them to the opposing side, while making it appear that the messages were coming from the civilian authorities on Kepler Station rather than from their enemies. The psychological manipulation was subtle, but powerful. Both sides were willing to take orders from desperate civilians, even if those same instructions would be rejected if they came directly from their military opponents. By serving as an invisible intermediary, the Terra Nova could coordinate the rescue efforts, without either side realizing they were cooperating with their enemies. Chen activated the plan with a broadcast to Kepler Station's civilian government. "This is Commander Chen of the neutral vessel Terra Nova. We are prepared to assist with evacuation coordination. Please transmit your population distribution data and evacuation priorities to us, and we will relay optimal rescue protocols to all available ships in the area." The response from the station was immediate and grateful. The civilian authorities had been trying to coordinate their own rescue for hours, but every attempt had been sabotaged by the competing military forces. Having a neutral party manage the logistics was exactly what they needed. What followed was a masterpiece of strategic deception. As evacuation data flowed from Kepler Station to the Terra Nova, Dr. Webb's communication protocols went into effect. Instructions from the civilian government were transmitted to both fleets simultaneously, but each side received versions that were subtly modified to account for their different technological capabilities and tactical preferences. The Threnodi fleet received evacuation orders that emphasized systematic, methodical rescue operations using their superior defensive shields to protect civilian transports. The Valdris fleet received instructions that played to their strengths in rapid deployment and coordinated swarm tactics. Both sets of orders were designed to complement each other perfectly, creating an integrated rescue operation that neither side realized they were participating in. Dr. Vasquez monitored the biological responses from both fleets as the operation began. The subliminal stress frequencies were having their intended effect, keeping both sides too anxious and focused on immediate tactical concerns to step back and analyze the larger strategic picture. They were following orders from civilian authorities and protecting refugees, which satisfied their moral imperatives, while remaining vigilant against treachery from their enemies. The first phase of the evacuation proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Threnodi defensive formations created safe corridors through the debris field around Kepler Station, while Valdris rapid response units provided escort services for civilian transports. Neither side was directly communicating with the other, but their actions were perfectly coordinated through the Terra Nova's invisible relay system. Lieutenant Park watched the tactical display with growing amazement. "Commander, this is incredible. Both fleets are working together like they've been planning this operation for months. They're covering each other's weak points without even realizing it." But Chen knew that the most dangerous part of the plan was still ahead. As the evacuation continued, both sides would eventually notice how smoothly everything was proceeding. Military commanders who had survived 50 years of warfare didn't stay alive by failing to recognize tactical anomalies. Sooner or later, someone would start asking questions about why their enemies were behaving so cooperatively. That moment came exactly 47 minutes into the evacuation, when Admiral Kess of the Threnodi fleet transmitted a message that made Chen's blood run cold. "Civilian Authority Kepler Station, this is Admiral Kess. Our tactical analysis suggests that Valdris fleet movements are coordinated with our own operations in a manner that defies their historical behavior patterns. We suspect they may be implementing a deception strategy designed to position their forces for a surprise attack once civilian evacuation is complete. Please advise on revised security protocols." At almost the same moment, Fleet Commander Zara of the Valdris forces sent her own message of suspicion. "Kepler Station Control, this is Commander Zara. Threnodi formations are providing defensive support for our rescue operations in ways that contradict 5 decades of tactical doctrine. This level of cooperation suggests they may be planning to trap our ships once we are committed to evacuation duties. Request immediate guidance on threat assessment procedures." Chen realized that both commanders had reached the same conclusion from opposite directions. They were too experienced to believe that their enemies would suddenly start helping them without ulterior motives. The very success of the coordination was making them suspicious that it was all an elaborate trap. Dr. Webb looked up from his communication station with alarm. "Commander, both sides are starting to pull back from the evacuation. If they disengage now, the civilian transports that are already in transit will be caught in the middle when hostilities resume." Chen made a decision that required her to abandon the subtle approach and take a much more direct risk. She ordered Dr. Webb to open a 3-way communication channel that would allow all parties to see and hear each other simultaneously for the first time in decades. "Admiral Kess, Commander Zara, this is Commander Chen of the Earth vessel Terra Nova. I'm the source of the coordination you've both detected. For the past hour, my ship has been serving as a communication relay between your forces and the civilian authorities on Kepler Station." The response was explosive. Both alien commanders began transmitting simultaneously, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations, demands for explanation, and threats of immediate military action. Chen let them vent their anger for nearly a minute before cutting through the noise with a simple statement that stopped both of them cold. "You've just spent 47 minutes working together to save 2 million lives, and it was the most efficient military operation either of your fleets has conducted in years." Silence fell over the communication channel. Chen could see both alien commanders on her split screen, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion to something that might have been recognition. Admiral Kess was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. "Human Commander, what you have done constitutes a violation of military protocols that could be considered an act of war against both our civilizations." Commander Zara's response was equally measured but carried undertones of curiosity. "Your deception was successful only because both our forces were focused on civilian protection rather than tactical advantage." This suggests you understand something about our motivations that we perhaps do not recognize ourselves. Chen had prepared for this moment, knowing that her next words would determine whether the fragile cooperation would collapse into renewed warfare or evolve into something more permanent. Admiral, Commander, I want to show both of you something that your own tactical displays have been recording for the past hour. She activated a holographic replay of the evacuation operation, but with the communication deception removed. The display showed both fleets working in perfect harmony, their combined capabilities creating an evacuation system that was far more effective than either side could have achieved alone. Look at what you accomplished when you weren't spending your energy trying to prevent each other from succeeding, Chen said quietly. Look at how many lives you saved when you focused on your shared objectives instead of your differences. The holographic display painted a picture that neither commander could argue with. The Threnodi defensive formations had provided perfect protection for the more vulnerable Valdris transport ships. The Valdris rapid response capabilities had covered gaps in the Threnodi evacuation schedule with surgical precision. Together, they had achieved a level of operational efficiency that neither side had experienced in decades. Dr. Vasquez chose this moment to add the crucial psychological insight that could make the difference between success and failure. Admiral Kess, Commander Zara, my analysis of your crew communications during the operation shows stress levels that were significantly lower than your normal combat parameters. Working together reduced the psychological burden on your personnel rather than increasing it. Admiral Kess studied the data that Dr. Vasquez transmitted to his ship. This suggests that our crews found the cooperative operation less stressful than normal military actions, despite the presence of enemy forces in close proximity. Commander Zara was examining similar psychological profiles from her own personnel. Our warriors showed increased efficiency and reduced combat fatigue when their objectives aligned with Threnodi operations rather than opposing them. Chen seized the opening. Both of your civilizations have been fighting for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to work toward construction rather than destruction. Your people are exhausted from 50 years of warfare, but they've never been given an alternative. She activated another display, this one showing the tactical capabilities of both fleets, if they were working in combination rather than opposition. The theoretical fleet that emerged from this analysis was overwhelming in its power and efficiency. Combined Threnodi-Valdris operations could accomplish objectives that were impossible for either side individually. Imagine what you could achieve if you applied this level of coordination to exploration rather than warfare, Chen continued. Imagine the worlds you could settle, the technologies you could develop, the threats you could defend against if you were working together instead of destroying each other. Lieutenant Park was monitoring both fleets during this conversation, watching for signs that the temporary ceasefire was about to collapse. What he saw surprised him. Commander, both fleets are maintaining their positions, but they're not powering weapons or preparing for immediate combat. I think they're actually considering what you're proposing. Admiral Kess transmitted a private message to Commander Zara, the first direct communication between the two military leaders in over a decade. Chen couldn't intercept the content, but she could see that the conversation was taking place. After several minutes, both commanders returned their attention to the three-way channel. Admiral Kess spoke first, his voice carrying a weight of weariness that seemed to come from deep in his soul. Commander Chen, what you have demonstrated today suggests possibilities that the Threnodi Republic has not considered for many years. However, 5 decades of warfare have created conditions that cannot be easily reversed. Even if both sides desired peace, the practical challenges of demobilization would be overwhelming. Commander Zara's response showed similar exhaustion mixed with hope. The Valdris Confederacy has entire generations who have known nothing but military service. Our economies are organized around weapon production and fleet maintenance. The social structures that would be necessary for peacetime do not currently exist. Chen realized that both commanders were identifying the real obstacle to peace. It wasn't hatred or irreconcilable differences between the species. It was the simple fact that both civilizations had become so adapted to warfare that they literally didn't know how to function without it. That's exactly why you need each other, she said. The Threnodi have maintained some civilian infrastructure because of your defensive nature. The Valdris have retained exploration and innovation capabilities because of your expansion focus. Each side has preserved something that the other has lost to the war. Dr. Webb transmitted detailed analysis of both civilizations' remaining non-military capabilities. The data showed that a combined society would have all the components necessary to rebuild a peacetime economy and social structure. But neither side possessed these elements individually. The conversation that followed lasted for 3 hours and covered topics that hadn't been discussed in the sector for half a century. Logistics of combined fleet operations. Procedures for shared territorial administration. Protocols for integrating two military cultures that had been enemies for longer than most of their personnel had been alive. When the session finally ended, both commanders had agreed to a preliminary framework for cooperation that went far beyond a simple ceasefire. The Threnodi and Valdris fleets would conduct joint operations for the remainder of the civilian evacuation from Kepler Station. If those operations proved successful, both sides would consider expanded cooperation in other areas. 6 months later, Commander Chen stood on the observation deck of the new joint Threnodi-Valdris space station that had been constructed at the former site of the battle zone around Kepler Station. Through the viewports, she could see mixed fleets of both species conducting exploration missions to star systems that had been abandoned during the war. The transformation had been remarkable. The combination of Threnodi defensive technology and Valdris expansion capabilities had created a civilization more advanced and powerful than either species had achieved individually. The psychological benefits of working toward shared goals rather than mutual destruction had been even more significant than the technological advantages. Dr. Vasquez had published her research on war-induced cultural trauma and recovery procedures, which had become the standard protocol for post-conflict rehabilitation throughout known space. Her work had already prevented 2 other potential wars between different species by helping them understand how extended conflict could trap civilizations in cycles of violence. Dr. Webb had been appointed as the first human ambassador to the Threnodi-Valdris alliance, coordinating humanity's growing role as mediators in interspecies disputes. His linguistic analysis of how warfare shaped cultural communication had become required reading for diplomats throughout the galaxy. Lieutenant Park had accepted a position as tactical advisor to the combined alliance fleet, helping to develop new operational doctrines that emphasized cooperation and mutual support rather than dominance and conquest. The war that had lasted 50 years was now remembered as the conflict that taught the galaxy how cooperation could emerge from the ashes of seemingly permanent hostility. The Threnodi-Valdris alliance had become a model for interspecies partnership, proving that even the most bitter enemies could find common ground when they were helped to see beyond their ancient grievances. Chen looked out at the stars, thinking about how a simple change in perspective had accomplished what half a century of military might could not. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against conflict was simply the willingness to believe that former enemies could become allies, and the courage to act on that belief even when everyone else had given up hope. The battle zone that had once been filled with the debris of destroyed ships and dead worlds was now bustling with construction projects, scientific expeditions, and cultural exchange programs. Where millions had once died in endless warfare, millions more now lived in the growing prosperity of an alliance that had learned to build rather than destroy. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization hadn't been superior technology or military prowess. It had been the simple recognition that most conflicts continued not because they couldn't be solved, but because the participants had forgotten that solutions were possible. Sometimes all it took was an outsider with fresh eyes to remind everyone involved that there were alternatives to eternal war. 5 years after the Kepler Station incident, the galaxy had fundamentally changed. What historians now call the Afternoon Peace had rippled across known space, inspiring 17 other conflicts to seek human mediation. The United Earth Diplomatic Corps had grown from a small exploration service into the most respected peacekeeping organization in galactic history. Commander Chen, now Admiral Chen, walked through the Memorial Gardens on New Harmony Station, the crown jewel of Threnodi-Valdris cooperation. The crystalline trees grown from both homeworlds created patterns of light that would have been impossible to imagine during the war years. Children of both species played together in the gardens, speaking a hybrid language that incorporated elements from Threnodi, Valdris, and human communication systems. The numbers told an incredible story. The 50-year war had consumed roughly 3 trillion credits in military spending and claimed over 40 billion lives across both civilizations. The peace had generated twice that economic value in just 5 years through joint technological development, expanded trade routes, and coordinated exploration programs. More importantly, an entire generation was growing up without the psychological trauma that had defined their parents' lives. Dr. Elena Vasquez approached Chen with a data tablet showing the latest psychological health assessments from both species. The results exceeded every projection. Combat stress disorders had virtually disappeared among former military personnel who transitioned to cooperative roles. Birth rates had increased dramatically as both civilizations felt secure enough to plan for the future. Educational systems had been revolutionized to emphasize problem-solving and collaboration rather than tactical superiority and threat assessment. The success had caught the attention of species throughout the galaxy. The Threnodi Republic had requested human assistance in resolving their territorial dispute with the Sirius Collective. The Vegan Trade Federation wanted help mediating their resource conflicts with 3 different neighbor civilizations. Even the notoriously isolated Regal Empire had quietly inquired about human diplomatic techniques. Chen paused at the centerpiece of the memorial gardens, a simple plaque that read, "To the billions who died, believing peace was impossible, and to the millions who live, proving them wrong." Below it, in smaller text, "Sometimes the solution to an impossible problem is remembering that impossible is just another word for unexplored." The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Integrating 2 military cultures required constant attention to prevent old suspicions from resurging. Economic transitions from war production to peaceful development created temporary unemployment and social disruption. Some extremist factions on both sides continued to advocate for renewed hostilities, though their influence diminished with each passing year as the benefits of cooperation became undeniable. Dr. Marcus Webb joined them at the memorial, carrying reports from the latest joint exploration mission to the Andromeda approach. The combined Threnodi Valdris fleet had discovered 14 habitable worlds and 3 previously unknown intelligent species, all of whom had been contacted using protocols developed from the Kepler station experience. The human approach to conflict resolution had become a subject of intensive study throughout the galaxy. Universities offered degrees in applied diplomatic psychology. Military academies taught courses on cooperative tactical theory. The core insight that most conflicts persisted due to psychological patterns rather than irreconcilable differences had revolutionized how advanced civilizations approach disagreement. Lieutenant James Park, now Captain Park, commanded one of the new joint exploration vessels that had been designed using combined technologies from all 3 species. His ship carried crews trained in human mediation techniques, Threnodi defensive systems, and Valdris rapid response protocols. They represented the future of galactic civilization, diverse, cooperative, and focused on discovery rather than conquest. As the sun set over New Harmony Station, Chen reflected on how a routine exploration mission had accidentally changed the course of galactic history. The Terra Nova had been looking for new star systems to catalog. Instead, they had found something much more valuable. Proof that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or military might, but the ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. The memorial gardens filled with evening light that filtered through the hybrid trees, creating patterns that symbolized everything the new alliance represented. Beauty emerging from cooperation, strength building through diversity, hope growing from the ashes of despair. Chen smiled as she watched children from 3 different species work together to solve a puzzle game, their laughter echoing through the gardens. They would grow up in a galaxy where war was studied as a historical curiosity rather than experienced as daily reality. They would inherit technologies, opportunities, and possibilities that their grandparents could never have imagined. The 50-year war had finally ended not with victory or defeat, but with the recognition that former enemies could choose to become partners. And sometimes, that choice could transform an entire galaxy in the space of a single afternoon. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.